Somewhere in the world right now, there's an airport with runways long enough to land the largest passenger jet ever built, a terminal designed to move tens of millions of travelers a year. And on most days, you could walk through its main hall and count the other humans on two hands. It isn't abandoned, it isn't closed, it's fully staffed, fully operational, and almost entirely empty. And it costs more to build than the entire annual GDP of some countries. This is the story of what happens when a government builds a monument to where it wants to be, instead of an airport for where it actually is. Every ambitious country eventually builds an airport as a statement. It's one of the oldest tricks in nation branding. Land somewhere new, and the first thing you see is the country's confidence made physical. Dubai did it, Singapore did it, Istanbul did it, and mostly succeeded. But there's a difference between building an airport ahead of demand and building one entirely disconnected from it. Ahead of demand means you're betting the growth is coming in 5 years. Disconnected from demand means you built the destination and forgot to check whether anyone actually wanted to go there. That's the trap this airport walked directly into, and it walked in with its eyes open, warned every step of the way. The airport in question was projected at planning stage to handle tens of millions of passengers annually within its first decade, numbers that would put it among the busiest hubs on the continent. The reality, years after opening, has landed at a small single-digit fraction of that figure. Entire concourses sit dark, moving walkways run for nobody. Duty-free shops built to serve international crowds close early for lack of customers, some permanently shuttered within 2 years of the terminal's grand opening. The airport was never short of ambition, it was short of a reason to exist. It was built without a single low-cost carrier committed to using it, without adequate ground transportation connecting it to the population centers it was meant to serve, and, in one of the more remarkable planning failures in modern aviation history, closer to a rival airport's existing catchment area than to any underserved population that might have filled it. The first hidden reason is the oldest one in infrastructure politics: prestige overriding feasibility studies. Independent aviation consultants, brought in during the planning phase, flagged passenger projections as wildly optimistic, built on national GDP growth assumptions that assumed uninterrupted, multi-decade expansion, with no downturns, no competition, and no shift in travel patterns. Those warnings were included in the final reports. They were not reflected in the final decision. The project proceeded at its original scale, because scaling it down would have meant admitting, publicly, that the vision had been wrong from the start. The second hidden reason is debt structure. Much of the airport's construction was financed through loans denominated in foreign currency, borrowed when the local currency was strong. By the time construction finished, currency depreciation had inflated the real cost of repayment by a significant multiple, meaning the airport now has to generate revenue, not just to cover its operating costs, but to service a debt burden that grew larger the longer the project dragged on, independent of anything the airport itself did right or wrong. The third hidden reason is the quiet killer of ambitious infrastructure everywhere: the last mile. An airport is only as useful as the trip to get to it. This one was built in a location chosen largely because the land was available and politically convenient, not because it sat near existing rail lines, highways, or population centers. Promised high-speed rail connections were delayed for years past the airport's opening, leaving travelers facing multi-hour road trips to reach a facility built to save them time. An airport that takes longer to reach than the flight itself defeats its own purpose before a single plane takes off. Airlines quietly tell the same story in the language they understand best: routes. Multiple carriers that initially signed on to launch service pulled out before the first flight, citing insufficient projected demand once independent market research replaced the government's own passenger estimates. One flag carrier scaled its planned daily flights down to a fraction of the original schedule within 18 months of launch. Cargo operators initially told the airport would become a regional logistics hub, redirected freight to older, better connected facilities instead, facilities that, despite their age, still had the ground transportation infrastructure this new airport lacked. Meanwhile, maintenance costs kept accruing regardless of passenger volume. Runways need resurfacing, whether 10 planes or 10,000 land on them each day. Terminal climate control, lighting, and security staffing are largely fixed costs, not variable ones. The airport authority has had to draw on public subsidies simply to keep the lights on in concourses that see, on an average weekday, more employees than travelers. The debt doesn't disappear because the passengers didn't show up. It gets absorbed by the national budget, refinanced, or quietly rolled into broader infrastructure debt, where it becomes harder to trace and harder to hold anyone accountable for. Every dollar spent servicing an underused airport's debt is a dollar not spent on schools, hospitals, or the transit connections that might have actually made the airport viable in the first place. There's a harder cost too: the erosion of public trust in big infrastructure promises. When the next genuinely necessary mega project is proposed, a real hospital, a real rail line, it now has to overcome public memory of the last monument that didn't deliver. Ambitious infrastructure requires public buy-in, and buy-in is a resource these projects burn through as surely as concrete and steel. This airport is not an isolated embarrassment. It's the visible endpoint of a pattern that recurs whenever national pride and infrastructure planning collide without an honest referee in between. The temptation to build for the country you want to become, financed by debt the country you currently are, has to repay. Aviation analysts increasingly cite this airport in exactly the same breath as a handful of similarly oversized ghost airports scattered across different continents, different governments, different currencies, the same route failure. It has become, unintentionally, the textbook case for how not to plan a hub. There are paths back. Airports have recovered from slow starts before, some by attracting a single dominant low-cost carrier willing to build an entire network around cheap landing fees the airport is now desperate enough to offer. Others survive by pivoting toward cargo and logistics once the passenger promise has clearly failed, leaning into cheaper land and available capacity rather than continuing to chase a passenger number that isn't coming. But recovery, if it happens, will take a decade or more, and it will happen at a scale far smaller than the original vision, a permanent physical monument to the gap between a projection on a slide deck and the reality of who actually needs to fly somewhere. Walk back through that empty concourse from the opening, the escalators still run, the departure boards still light up with a handful of destinations. Somewhere, a maintenance crew is polishing floors that barely see footprints. None of it is broken. All of it works exactly as designed. What failed wasn't the engineering. It was the assumption underneath it that if you build something big enough, impressive enough, ambitious enough, the demand will eventually catch up to meet it. Sometimes it does. This time, years later, it still hasn't. And the runways sit there, long enough for anything in the sky, waiting for a version of the future that hasn't arrived.